And hello everyone, and welcome. I know Marlena mentioned earlier, and I think if you guys, especially if you're here with me for the next 3 sessions, if you're staying on the beat track, you'll probably hear me say this at each time, but I just want to reiterate that this session is just a quick touch upon this topic. And so I'm hoping I can give you a lot of good information, but it may be you walk out of here with questions, but hopefully not confusion. So that's my goal. And this one was interesting for me to do because I've never had to speak about, for about a half an hour on just construction site entrances. And I was questioning how much material I could put together between my boss and myself. And I think we have a fair amount here, and hopefully it's a lot of different ideas. I do want to put the caveat in here that there might be some of this information or some of these items that I talk about are not available here, but they can be. In fact, one of them that was not available here, I believe is going to start being carried by one of the distributors out there, which I thought was great information. So I've been in this industry now for too many years, and I've been lucky enough that I've been on all ends of the spectrum. I've been able to do the design, I've been able to do the inspection, I've inspected my own plans. Man, that was an eye-opener, to tell you the truth. But I've also been able to do audits as well. So I've gotten the full spectrum, and I feel it's helped me in trying to understand this whole world of stormwater and all the intricacies that go along with it, and how much of an area it is that it's a continually changing aspect. So stabilized construction entrances. To me, they are one of the most difficult aspects of a construction site to control, because for the longest time, there really hadn't been good solutions to the track out problem. Most contractors, I would hope, would have basically a daily regime where towards the end of the day, they're out there scraping the roads, they're cleaning up anything that might be tracked off. And unfortunately, Mother Nature works against us here. We can go with dry weather, and the track out is very minimal, but then you get the rainstorms, and then the track out becomes a lot more of an issue. And the BMPs we utilize cannot control it satisfactorily. But it is a big issue, and it's something that we have to recognize and be taking care of religiously on our sites itself. But maybe I'm hoping that some of the options that I show you today might give you a different idea or a different item to possibly use than what you might have done traditionally. All right, so obviously the solution to controlling track out is to clean the tires. Very simple, very simple. Should be something that we should be able to easily control, but it's not. Because I mean, ideally you should be out there, you should be spraying them down, those tires should be squeaky clean when they leave the site. Obviously not practical. Instead, what we deal with is the mud, and maybe it's a little mud, maybe it's a lot of mud leaving the site itself. So traditionally, the main tracking control that we have been seeing used for years upon years is the rock vehicle tracking pad. It was a first guess. It was an idea, an item out there that somebody said, well, this could help. The idea behind the tracking control is that the vehicle drives over it, and the vibration from driving on a rough surface like rock causes somehow magically for all the sediment to fall off the tire. Okay, in more cases it kind of scrapes the material off to a certain extent, but most tires leave the site with a lot of material still on them. And in some cases also the rock as well is now embedded into some of that mud. So rock, we have the traditional aspect. It's actually perceived as being inexpensive. Well, yeah, it's inexpensive if we don't maintain it, if we don't do anything to make sure that it is remaining a functional BMP on the site itself. Yeah, it could be somewhat inexpensive. However, in some cases, the most appropriate size rock and type of rock may not be readily available at that time of year, or maybe at that location, to be able to refresh it, to put it in continually and keep it maintained. So I've seen over in different places across the nation, some regulatory officials have allowed individuals to use recycled concrete, for example, for their tracking pad, and have had a lot of issues with it. And it was mostly because the hard rock wasn't available at the time. They've allowed smaller size rock, they've allowed larger size rock, trying to address that aspect of, am I getting an echo? I feel like I have a little bit of an echo. It's probably just me. It's just my voice. But with the hard rock not always being available, they've tried to come up with other items to use in place of it, and not with a whole lot of success. The other item that we face with our vehicle tracking control is having a sufficient length for the vehicles to drive over it long enough to get as much of the material off. And I see this happen even so much more so when we're doing smaller projects or projects that our right-of-way is very, very limited. And so we end up putting this little tiny pad out, and basically, to me, it's almost worthless. It's more of a just, we're doing something because we have to, but it's not going to be that effective. And then the other one is either the rock material becomes so clogged with stuff that it looks like just the regular dirt floor or dirt ground is there, or the rock material starts to disappear because the pad wasn't put in properly, or because they have to keep replacing it, it's not reinstalled correctly. I see this happen a lot. It just kind of disappears into the ground, and it means that the rock is being pushed down into the soil itself. So it's an issue. It's something that there tends to be a lot more maintenance on, and not just on the rock, but then cleaning up the material that gets tracked out. So how do you solve the problems with rocks? So the disappearing rock, well, we can put the fabric filter cloth underneath it. That helps minimize the rock from disappearing into the ground. And then obviously just continual maintenance, a costly endeavor. Also utilizing the right rock. And I throw this in there because, like I said, regulatory agencies started allowing different size rock to be used, and they found out how this is probably your best diameter if you do actually use rock itself. We've had rock that was too small. They've used the 3/4 inch size diameter rock, and we find out that it just sticks to the lugs of the tires, and then the tires just take it out, and now you have little debris flying up and cracking people's windshield. We've also had regulatory agencies that said, okay, let's go the other direction, and we seem to be getting the large rock, the 6+ rock. Why don't we try that? Well, do you think anybody's going to drive over that? No, I wouldn't want, if I had a passenger vehicle, I wouldn't want to drive over that, let alone the big truckers having to come in and out. What I've always seen with this, when we've seen the larger rock, is they bypass it. They just go around, which completely defeats the purpose of it. Also, the problem with the large rock is that it's been known to get stuck between the dualies of your big trucks, and now it's not just a small missile that gets launched out. It can be a very damaging and deadly piece of rock. So it's just some of the options that different agencies and different entities have tried to solve the problem of, well, what if we don't have that idealized size rock? Well, maybe we should try something different. What are some of those alternatives though? And this is where I think that the information is really good, because like I said, I was trying to figure out, really, I'm gonna have to have enough material to talk for this long. Is there enough alternatives out there to be able to really talk? And there actually is. There's a number of different ones here. The geosynthetic mats. This is one that I've seen crop up probably, I'd say easily 5 years plus. And at first I wasn't quite sure what it was made out of, but it's a fabric, a woven fabric, and it has bamboo in just little slots. And it's the bamboo that gives the ridges setup that the trucks go over it, and those bamboo stakes cause that vibration, and the material then is supposed to fall off of the tires. The idea as well was they're meant for little tiny areas or small access, and they can be reused. Not a stupid idea, in all honesty. If we can come up with vehicle tracking control that you can pick up and take to another site, all of a sudden our costs start dropping. If we're able to use them 2 sites, 3 sites, 4 sites, 5 sites, you know, the initial cost may be up here, but then over time that cost really drops. So I give credit to those individuals who are trying to come up with alternatives, but just because we have something new out there, we just need to be careful as to what it is and how it works. Like I said, the idea is there, but there are issues with it. That short length again. We don't have a long distance for the vehicles to go over it and allow those tires enough rotations to try and knock as much material off of them as possible. I think a lot of contractors look at these as, well, I got something down, I should be good to just leave it without any maintenance. And if you look here, this is the mat. I mean, it's pretty much almost matching the soil anymore because of how much material has been just mushed into it. So maintenance is still key with these things. You know, absolutely. Obviously, if we maybe lengthen out, we increase the length of the mats, so we put multiple mats in place, maybe we can get that distance we need with the tires to be able to knock more of the material off. Okay, it's a good idea. I give the thought is correct. It's just sometimes the BMP may not work correctly, so we just have to be really careful. So it still has a limited effectiveness. To me, the short length is not effective. So if we can get a longer length, it's a little bit better. But this is actually a better image of it, because you can see right in there the little ridges of the bamboo where the pockets are. But even with length, if your side is nasty enough and you have enough vehicles going over it, it's going to turn ugly. So maintenance, what needs to be done in this case? Probably brand new ones put down. Or if this material is dry enough, to see if you can remove it via a vacuum truck or something to try and clean it up. Because obviously at this point, this is ineffective now, and material just gets tracked onto the street itself. The other issue with this is it is a fabric, and so it can tear, and those bamboo stakes that are in it do break over time. This is where I see that other issue of the bamboo alone is not being replaced to keep those ridges there to allow the vibration to occur. So something to be aware of. Like I said, I think some contractors look at it that I can get one of these and I'm good for the rest of the construction process. Maintenance is key. We're calling this a flexible ridge, and it kind of is, because it moves a little bit. It's flexible, I guess. Yeah, it's flexible. But the nice thing about this is it is reusable. It's a very sturdy structure. There's a lot more to it than perhaps the fabric that we had in the last one. The pros to the fabric with the bamboo is you just have a couple laborers that just roll it up and unroll it and move it from place to place. So very simplistic to move from one spot to another. This one takes a little bit more effort to actually pick it up and move, but it is reusable. Okay, and you can see there how much of a rigidness there is, and when I say ridges, so the tires end up going up and down a lot more, and that intense vibration can actually occur. How good is it? Once again, it's something that at least is reusable. It takes a lot less damage over time. How do you clean it? Well, obviously, you probably, a good suggestion I heard was you pull out the vacuum truck, and when the material starts to dry, you clean it from inside those openings. You probably would put a fabric underneath it as well to help out. But it can be transported to other job sites. But maintenance is a question. How do you regularly maintain it? Once again, just because you have this rigid structure doesn't mean that maintenance now becomes something that we don't have to deal with. Your more non-flexible ridges, and this is one that I've seen used here in Hawaii. These are just little units that are just hooked together to give you the width and the length that you actually need, which I like because you can fit it to the site. The prior one is kind of a set width and set size, and you may have to do a couple of them, so you might have some issues with installing them in certain areas. This one you can create the pattern that you want and the length that you need. In this case, and it's a smart idea, is they're installed with the fabric underneath them, and they're actually secured to the ground itself. I'm not sure on the previous one how the securing actually occurs, but this one you can really see all the little bolts that hook them together, but then there's some of these that are actually securing it to the ground itself. And again, the idea is you can get in there with a vacuum truck and actually clean it out. But the openings are there to allow the material to fall off. My question on this one is I really want to see this one work after a good rainstorm and a lot of equipment coming over it consistently in one day to see how well these openings actually collect the soil. That's the one thing I don't have good data on, because this really isn't ridges like you saw on the previous one. It's a lot more of a flat structure. So I think the idea is it's kind of scraping some of the material off as it drives over the mat itself. But it can collect a fair amount when it actually is functioning. And again, Once you're done with it in one spot, you can pick it up and disassemble it and take it to other sites. And the thing is what's nice on this one is you can probably repair just certain little panels that may become damaged versus the whole thing once it becomes destroyed. So, but again, maintenance. Have to make sure that this thing is maintained. Have to still have those individuals that are willing to scrape the street if this becomes overloaded. This one is an interesting one. We saw this at a conference this last year, and this is the one that actually I think they're going to start carrying here in Hawaii, so it might be something to consider. It's a very robust, rigid structure. It's reusable, it's sturdy, and those cones have a nice depth to them. So to me, there's a lot of volume in this unit to actually collect soil before you have to be going in and really cleaning it out on a regular basis. These though come in larger panels here, so once again, you know, if your site can't contain a long enough stretch of them, you know, you might have an issue. You might have to put these in conjunction with another type of BMP to go with it. So, you know, it's something that's pretty interesting, and it's something that would be interesting to see how well it works out here on the site. The individual who created it said they've had a lot of good success with it. Of course, he's the one trying to sell it too, so of course he's going to say there's a lot of good success. But like I said, I'd like to see some of these in action, especially after a good rainfall with a lot of equipment on them. But you can see kind of the height, and you can see an actual piece of equipment's tire, how it situates onto that structure itself, and it's very rigid. Okay, so interesting item to consider. Kind of one that I think of as a little traditional, but still it could be very viable, is with some of your more traditional ridges, like I call them the home-built type ridges, where they come and they just kind of assemble something with either bars or angle iron or stuff like that creates, you know, a little platform for them to drive on. But the thing to always be asking, no matter what type of construction entrance you are using, do you have the sufficient length existing to get those tires across it enough to knock off the material as much as possible? Your vehicle tracking pad that's made of strictly rock, traditionally the typical detail calls out for a minimum of 50 feet. So that kind of gives you an idea as to how long that should be versus maybe what is being used on the site. And then maintenance, are the grooves being actually cleaned on that regular basis? In this case, they actually did a combination, which there's a couple pictures I'll show you in a minute showing you combinations of different types of tracking control, but they have the ridges here right as they leave the site. But prior to that, they actually have a vehicle tracking pad. I kind of disagree with the size rock they used, but still they actually had a pad there, so you're not coming off of just straight dirt, and maybe it's a little bit more chance for those tires to actually go over it and knock some of the material off. But ideally we need to at least get one full tire rotation on a vehicle tracking control, but even better would be multiple tire rotations. This one was a great picture because it shows how just thinking outside the box can actually work as well. This is a cattle guard. And they went ahead and they kept it in place, and they used it in conjunction with rock on both sides, because this is a short distance, but with the rock and everything, they were able to make it work. This pad was, of course, a lot longer, but the combination of the two seemed to work pretty good. The nice thing about this setup was there's a void underneath the cattle guard that allowed the material to fall out of the ridges. Of course, they would have to pop the ridges up ever so often and clean that out, but instead of the mud just staying within the ridges itself right there and eventually building up and covering them, it was able to drop down, and they got a longer use before they had to maintain the actual ridges. The vehicle, the rock part of it, yeah, they had to maintain a lot more. This is just kind of a different take on the grates or the ridges, and this is one that you can pick up and move, but it's a pretty hefty structure. And to me, what worries me is just, once again, it's that short distance. It's one tire rotation probably, but maybe not enough to go far enough. And you can see the potential negative that can still happen, you know, very muddy conditions, and it looks like they have a good rock pad around this, not true vehicle tracking rock, but at least a rock pad, and you can see how much material came onto it and how much material still left the site itself. So even with some of these different ideas and inventions that they're coming up with, we still have to make sure that we're maintaining it and knowing what the limits are to the structure itself. This one, they had a rock pad behind here and a movable structure where they go up and over, and they're trying to create that void underneath, you know, to give that volume before you drive off. You know, interesting idea. How practical is it? It depends on, I think, the contractor and how able they're actually to implement them. This one is an interesting one because you have some ridges here on the ramp coming out of it, but it's a water bath, and I have actually a couple pictures of what I would call a water trough or a water bath one, and how effective actually it can work. Wheel washing is one that I look at and say, this is probably the best way to clean your tires, because your tires will probably be pretty darn clean when you leave the site. But it's an expensive endeavor. So the question becomes, where would you use this? I would look at it if it's in an area that is a very sensitive location that you are driving onto, whether it's politics or whether it's just because of the surrounding area. It could be in a very sensitive wetland, or maybe you're discharging straight into the ocean itself right next to this site. Maybe it's something to consider, but it is an expensive endeavor because not just the item itself, but the labor that is required to go with it. This is actually in Singapore, this top picture, and that's what they do there. That's what they do. That is what is required, is washing. It's not vehicle tracking pad, it's not ridges, it's not grates, it's actual washing. And they've become very efficient at it. But the things to question and to look at and to be aware of is it's not a simple endeavor, because we got to make sure that whatever water is being used is captured and not allowed to leave the site. Is it being recycled? I mean, that's a lot of water you're using to wash these vehicles if you just have truck after truck after truck leaving. Is it being recycled in some way so that we can keep reusing it and not just wasting the water? And is the tracking of sediment still a problem? Obviously, you know, if you're using dirty, nasty water to clean the tires, you might still be tracking. And then the key one is, do we have polluted waters leaving the system? This one is what I call a water trough, and I'll give you two photographs of it. Basically, the truck comes in, and all it is just they place a depression in the ground, fill it up with water, and the vehicle, depending on how muddy the tires, either goes through it once or goes back and forth a few times until the tires come clean. Now, maintenance. Yeah, you're going to have sediment build up in this water over time. They end up pumping it out, treat the pumped water, clean the sediment, put fresh water in. It's actually pretty effective, but you notice they have a staging area of rock around it, so they don't then just drive out straight onto the road. They drive onto rock, and it can help with it. Interesting idea. Is it going to work here? Maybe not, but it's just another topic, another idea to look at. And these are just some of the close-up of some of the more robust washout systems that are available in the states themselves and how they can actually work. Like I said, a hefty structure. I mean, it's not a massive one, but it still takes a bit because we have to make sure we have the water and it's collected. Okay, but you know, with wheel washing, you can collect a fair amount of material from it. And instead of that going on the roadway and having to be scraped up, it's the instant collect there. So I kind of went through just the traditional rock. Is it a bad BMP? No. If it's the only thing that you can get, what works for the location, absolutely continue to use the rock, but make sure the maintenance is there, and just know you're probably going to have to scrape the roads. You know, there's a couple other new products out there, or newer products out there. I would suggest just looking at them, seeing if they might work for the site itself. Two of them that I showed up there is either already available in Hawaii or will be available in Hawaii. And then some of the traditional grates or ridges, you know, the homemade kind that they've created on the sites themselves. And then wheel washing or the wheel baths, wheel troughs is to me probably the most robust and the most effective, but probably the most expensive one out there. Any questions? Like I said, I hit kind of just very quickly on some of the different types out there, some of the issues I know with them. But I leave it up to you guys to really get out there and look and question and find out how they're used and how effective they are. Any questions?